She clocked out at 3:01 in the morning. Casino cameras caught her in those last few frames, walking out of the Palms, alive, smiling, carrying on with what looked like just another ordinary night. She had made that same drive home countless times, the same garage, the same hallway, the same townhouse she thought she knew. She had no idea someone was already inside. A man in a mask had been hiding in the downstairs bathroom for hours, gripping a hammer, waiting for her footsteps, waiting for the exact moment she walked through the door. And the most terrifying part of all was this. He was not there by chance. He was not a stranger. He was not acting alone. What happened to Shauna Tiafe was the result of weeks of planning, multiple failed attempts, weapons bought in cash, and a husband who, according to prosecutors, had already decided that if he could not control his wife, he would remove her entirely. This is the story of Shauna Tiafe, a woman described as warm, devoted, and full of life, who spent her final months trying to hold her family together, never knowing that the man she was still trying to reason with was already arranging her murder. Love true crime? The Ultimate Serial Killer Coloring Book features 65 notorious killers brought to life in bold, black and white line art. Single-sided pages dark, detailed, unforgettable. Available now on Amazon. Shauna Ann Castleton was born on March 13, 1966, in Salt Lake City, Utah. As a child, she was known for being cheerful, kind, and creative. She loved drawing flowers. She loved reading. She grew up in a faith-centered home, and the people who remembered her early years described her the same way people would describe her decades later: warm, social, and bright. When she was around 12 years old, her family moved to Broomall, Pennsylvania. A couple of years later, they moved again, this time to Northern Virginia, where Shauna spent her teenage years. She was a cheerleader. She had a lot of friends. She was the kind of person who made people feel comfortable quickly. Then, in 1994, at 28 years old, she made a major move. She left that life behind and relocated to Las Vegas. And unlike a lot of people who arrive in Las Vegas chasing a dream and lose themselves in the city, Shauna built a life there. She first worked selling cosmetics at Saks Fifth Avenue and Neiman Marcus. Later, she moved into casino hospitality and became a cocktail waitress at the Fiesta. Then, in 2001, when the Palms opened, Shauna was there from the very beginning. That job became a huge part of her life. Co-workers described her as bubbly, stylish, hardworking, and memorable. She remembered regular customers. She baked cupcakes for birthdays. She had the kind of personality that made people feel like they knew her, even if they had only met her once. By all accounts, she was good at her job and good with people. In a city built on appearances and transactions, Shauna still came across as genuine. In 2002, while working at the Palms, she met George Miguel Tiafe. At first glance, George looked like the kind of man people trusted instantly. He had been his high school valedictorian. He graduated from West Point in 1994. He served in the Army Corps of Engineers. Later, he became a Las Vegas firefighter. He was disciplined, accomplished, respected, and outwardly stable. To the people around them, they looked like a strong match. About a year into their relationship, they welcomed their daughter, Maddie. And from that point on, Shauna's life revolved around her. Friends and relatives would later say that Maddie was the center of Shauna's universe. Everything she did, every choice she made, every plan she had for the future came back to her daughter. On March 16, 2006, Shauna and George got married in Hawaii. For a while, they looked like the picture of a hard-working Las Vegas family. A firefighter, a casino cocktail waitress, a daughter they adored, a life in Summerlin, and what seemed from the outside like a stable marriage. But the version people saw from the outside was not the full story. According to people close to Shauna, things began to change after a couple of happy years. Financial pressure hit the family, especially after the housing crash. And George, they said, became harder, more controlling, more suspicious, more critical. Friends and relatives later said he was jealous of Shauna's job, uncomfortable with how she dressed for work, and increasingly cruel in ways that left emotional damage behind closed doors. These were descriptions from her sister and people close to her, not formal court findings about abuse, but they were consistent enough to paint a pattern. By late 2011, the marriage was in serious trouble. In December 2011, George formally began divorce proceedings. By then, the couple had separate bank accounts, ongoing arguments about money, and a family court process that threatened George financially. Evidence later introduced in court suggested he was deeply unhappy about the possibility of having to pay Shauna money and turn over assets connected to his family. At the same time, another person was becoming more important in George's life. His name was Noel Scott Stevens. Stevens was not some polished friend or co-worker. He was a homeless handyman with a violent criminal history. He had prior felonies. He had drug-related issues. He lived on the margins and moved through life with the instability of someone who had long ago fallen out of the normal structure most people depend on. And yet George kept him close. In early 2012, after Stevens stabbed his own nephew and injured his hand, George reportedly treated that injury and let him stay at the family home for a short time. Shauna hated it. She found Stevens creepy. She did not want him around. She even threatened to call police because she believed he was dealing drugs. Eventually, Stevens left the home and went to camp in the desert nearby. But George did not cut him off. If anything, the relationship deepened. Stevens had access to George's house. He stored things there. He showered there. He communicated with George constantly. What may have looked to outsiders like sympathy or generosity was, according to prosecutors, becoming something far darker. By spring of 2012, Shauna had moved into her own apartment. By summer, the couple had sold their shared home and were living separately. They shared custody of Maddie. They were also attending marriage counseling because Shauna still had hope. That part matters. She was not checked out emotionally. She was still trying. People close to her said she wanted the family to work. She wanted her daughter to have a stable home. She wanted to believe things could improve. She was sad, yes, but not resigned. She was trying to navigate separation, co-parenting, and the collapse of the life she thought she had built. While Shauna was trying to save something, George, according to later court evidence, was moving in a very different direction. By late summer of 2012, prosecutors said George had approached Noel Stevens with an offer: kill Shauna. At first, Stevens said George offered him $1,000. Stevens later claimed he did not take that seriously. Then the amount rose to $5,000. That, he said, changed things. From there, the case stopped looking like marital breakdown and started looking like an operation. The two men discussed methods. One idea involved staging a crash. Another involved a zip tie. Eventually, they focused on hammers. That detail is one of the most disturbing parts of this case, because it suggests not rage, but design. According to later trial evidence, Stevens wanted a heavier hammer. George allegedly advised him against it, saying a lighter hammer would swing faster and be less likely to break. They bought multiple hammers, mostly with cash. George allegedly even warned Stevens not to use the one bought with George's own credit card. That is not the language of a man acting emotionally. That is the language of someone managing evidence before the crime has even happened. George also gave Stevens information that made the attack possible. Shauna's work schedule. A map showing where she parked at the Palms. Directions to her apartment, and most importantly, a key. By then, Stevens did not need luck. He needed timing. And in early September 2012, he made his first attempt. He went to the Palms planning to attack Shauna after work. But there were police officers nearby because of a concert, so he backed off. A few days later, there was another attempt. Surveillance cameras captured George and Stevens together, buying dark clothes, gloves, a knife, and other items in cash. That same night, Stevens went out again intending to carry out the killing, but he was arrested before he could do it. Police recovered a hammer, gloves, a knife, and a modified beanie. Even that did not stop the plot. After his release, Stevens contacted George again. Then came another attempt. This time, Stevens got a different hammer and hid near Shauna's apartment, waiting. But a police helicopter swept the area with its light, and he ran. He ditched the hammer and disappeared into the night. 3 attempts, 3 chances for the plan to die. 3 times it kept going, and all through this, Shauna kept living what she thought was a difficult but survivable reality: work, parenting, counseling, separation, worry, hope. Then something happened that clearly shook her. In early September, her apartment was burglarized. Her wedding ring was taken. Other items were disturbed. A strange piece of women's underwear appeared inside. She texted George a photo of it, asking if someone had been in her place. She was disturbed. Her family later said the burglary rattled her. What she did not know was that prosecutors believed the intruder was Noel Stevens, inside with the key George had given him. So by the time Shauna felt something was wrong, the person threatening her privacy was already inside the circle of trust around her life. Then came September 28, 2012. That day, Shauna got a new garage door opener, a normal detail, a boring detail, the kind of thing no one remembers, unless they are planning a murder. According to the later court record, George passed that information to Stevens. He also told him Shauna was not home. Stevens went into the apartment again. This time he did more than enter. He prepared. He moved jewelry, purses, and other items into a downstairs closet so that after the murder, he could take them and make the scene look like a robbery. He was not improvising anymore. He was setting a stage. That evening, George had a call with Shauna. Then, about 1 minute later, he called Stevens. That night, Shauna went to work at the Palms, just like she always did. She served drinks. She moved through the casino. She did her shift. At 3:01 in the morning on September 29th, surveillance cameras captured her clocking out. Those were the final public images of her alive. She drove home. Inside the townhouse, Stevens had already been waiting for hours. He was in the downstairs bathroom, in the dark, wearing a mask and gloves, holding a wood-handled hammer. Shauna came in through the garage. She walked through the townhouse, and as she passed the bathroom, Stevens stepped out. According to the evidence later presented in court, Shauna asked him why he was doing this. He did not answer. He hit her in the head. She went down. Then he got on top of her and kept striking her. The wooden handle broke. He kept going with the metal portion. The injuries told the story of what those final moments looked like: skull fractures, repeated blunt force trauma, broken fingers from trying to defend herself, evidence that she tried to protect herself until she could not anymore. Shauna Tiafe was 46 years old. After the attack, Stevens followed the plan as best he could. He took her purse, which contained more than $1,000 in cash and casino chips. He left the garage door open as a signal that the job was done. He forgot some items he had hidden in the closet, but he took enough to support the robbery narrative. Then he left. He went to George's house, changed clothes, buried the hammer, and later used an acquaintance to cash some of Shauna's casino chips. And then, in one of the most reckless and revealing moves in the case, he went to see a friend named William Penix, Big Will. Instead of hiding what he had done, Stevens bragged. He laughed. He described killing a woman with a hammer until the hammer broke. He said he had been paid $600 and expected more. That confession would become one of the reasons this case unraveled so fast. Around 9 o'clock that same morning, George Tiafe went to Shauna's townhouse. He brought Maddie with him. Then he called 911 after discovering Shauna's body. By then, she had already been dead for hours. For investigators, the case was not simple at first. George had what looked like a solid alibi. He had been at the fire station. He was not physically inside the apartment at the time of the murder. And because the attack was so violent, detectives briefly considered whether this could have been a stranger attack. But the case changed almost immediately because of Penix. After seeing the murder reported on the news, he went to police and pointed them towards Stevens. That single step changed everything. When detectives located Stevens, he did not immediately confess. But after they confronted him with bloody jeans recovered from his campsite, his position changed. He led police to the murder weapon. He gave them Shauna's apartment key, and from there, the prosecution built a case that did not rest on Stevens alone. The physical evidence was powerful. His DNA was linked to key items. Shauna's DNA was found on the murder weapon. There was forensic evidence tying Stevens to the scene and tying the aftermath back to George's orbit. The digital evidence was just as damaging. In September 2012 alone, George and Stevens exchanged 87 phone calls and 26 text messages. On the night before the murder, George ended a call with Shauna and then contacted Stevens within a minute. That kind of timing is hard to explain away. Then there was the surveillance, the shopping trips, the gloves, the dark clothing, the hammers, the knife, the cash purchases. Little by little, the case stopped being one man's confession and became a fully supported murder-for-hire prosecution. Then George's own behavior after the murder added another layer. After investigators confronted his family and made it clear he was a suspect, George drove his truck at high speed and crashed into a concrete barrier. Detectives believed it may have been a suicide attempt. By then, the image of the respectable firefighter husband was beginning to collapse. In January 2013, Noel Stevens pleaded guilty to murder and related charges. In exchange for his cooperation, the state did not pursue the death penalty against him. George pleaded not guilty, so the case moved toward trial. When the trial finally began in August 2015, the jury was shown the full architecture of the crime, not just the killing, the planning, the calls, the purchases, the key, the earlier break-in, the failed attempts, the staging of the scene, the garage door opener detail. And the prosecution's theory was clear. George Tiafe may not have physically swung the hammer, but he made the murder possible at every stage. The defense tried to attack Stevens, and not without reason. He was unstable. He had a criminal history. He was violent. He was absolutely the kind of witness a defense team would want a jury to distrust. But the problem for George was that the state had too much corroboration, too many calls, too many purchases, too many details Stevens could not have invented on his own. On September 3, 2015, the jury found George Tiafe guilty on all 7 counts. The next day, they gave him the harshest sentence available for the murder count, life without parole. Later, the judge added more consecutive prison time and described the plot in chilling terms. Then, on January 7, 2016, Noel Stevens was sentenced to 42 years to life. That was the legal end of the core case. But understanding what happened here requires more than just knowing who got convicted. It requires understanding what kind of crime this really was. Technical analysis. From an investigative standpoint, this case became strong because it did not rely on a single pillar. If all police had was Noel Stevens' word, the defense could have painted him as a manipulative addict trying to save himself. But that is not what happened. The case had layers. There was the confession to Penix, the recovery of the murder weapon, the apartment key, the bloody jeans, the DNA, the phone records, the surveillance footage, the cash purchases, the casino chips, the failed attempts that explained why this murder had taken so long to happen. That is what made the prosecution's theory so durable. And the phone evidence, in particular, was devastating because it gave the relationship between George and Stevens structure and timing. It showed repeated contact before the murder, crucial communication near the murder, and a volume of contact that made coincidence almost impossible to believe. This was also a strong case because the staging failed. The robbery story was not clean enough. Stevens forgot items. He talked too much. He left evidence behind. He behaved like exactly what he was. Not a professional hitman, but a chaotic, violent man being used in a murder plot he was not smart enough to fully conceal. That sloppiness is one reason the truth surfaced. Psychological analysis. George Tiafe, as presented by the prosecution, fits one of the most unsettling profiles in true crime: the controlled, respectable, organized offender. He was not impulsive. He was not chaotic. He did not explode in one moment of rage and lose control. He planned. He calculated. He thought ahead. He discussed methods. He considered evidence. He thought about suspicion before the killing even happened. That kind of mindset is chilling because it suggests a person who did not just want the problem gone. He wanted the solution to look clean. And the motive prosecutors built around him was not random either. This case looks deeply tied to control. Control over money, control over divorce, control over image, control over what happened next. Instead of adapting to the fact that his marriage was ending and that family court might cost him financially, the state argued that George chose to eliminate the person standing on the other side of that loss. Then there is Noel Stevens. He is almost the opposite profile. Less controlled, less disciplined, more chaotic, more impulsive, more visibly violent, the kind of person who could carry out a brutal act and then brag about it the same day. And that contrast matters because it helps explain why the partnership existed at all. George had the structure. Stevens had the violence. One planned, the other executed. And then there is Shauna. What makes her story so heartbreaking is that nothing in her final months necessarily looked from the outside like an active murder plot. It looked like a bad separation, a difficult marriage, a creepy handyman, a burglary, counseling, co-parenting stress. That is exactly why intimate partner violence can be so dangerous. Sometimes the threat does not look like a threat until it is far too late. If this case stayed with you, let me know in the comments what part hit you the hardest. Was it the planning? The repeated failed attempts? The fact that Shauna was still trying to save the marriage? Or the fact that the whole thing nearly looked like a random robbery? If you want more true crime cases told with full context and careful detail, subscribe. And most importantly, remember her name, Shauna Tiafe, because behind every headline like this, there was once a real person living an ordinary life, never knowing how close the danger already was.